Thank you so much. And props, hands off to Svetka for doing all this. Like she's doing an amazing job in the back end of everything. Really appreciate it. Dr. Katie, thank you so much for obviously for being on the show. You were recommended quite extensively to be on the show. Obviously, Auntie Lilikalā and Auntie Kalei as well, and I think also a mutual friend of ours, Adrian Kame'eleihiwa, that also suggested that like why did you bring her on the show? So by all means, or I don't even know if it was Adrian. I don't know. Anyway, there were so many people. Because we have limited time and I'm rattling off, and that's not the meaning of this whole exercise. Dr. Katie, where is Indigenous knowledge going right now? From the way that you're thinking about it, yeah, maybe that's the best question. How did you think about the question before we go into the answer of it?
I think about that question related to communities, not just within our islands, but within the globe and Pacifica, and what we learn from each other, the practices, the knowledge, the approaches to all different levels of governance is really important. So that's kind of how I think about that question.
And when it Dr. Kealoha, sorry, like I'm asking you questions of previous guests as well, but any thoughts on, because it's a very hot topic within the Indigenous world, difference, Indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge. Do you make a difference? Do you make that distinction, or is it similar in your view? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think Adrian had recommended that I follow you, so I started following you, and you had brought up the idea about knowledge of Indigenous peoples versus local knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, or Indigenous and local knowledge. And so my background is as a botanist, and I do more ethno stuff, so I study the relationships between people and their environment, specifically in School of Plants, but we kind of look at the whole system now. And so, that's kind of, the relationship is really important. So governance is one type of relationship, ritual and practice is another type of relationship, although they can cross together and be interrelated. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, can you repeat the question? I lost the train of thought.
No, it was perfect. Like it is.
The difference. Yeah. So
between
training in the writing, most of it came from journals. And so, but you're operating in the United Nations. And so Lilikalā has encouraged me to go. And so I haven't made that step yet, but I wanted to be more informed about what terminologies are being used in policy at different levels, because everyone uses and likes to be similar to prefer pronouns, but differently. Different Indigenous peoples like to be recognized how they like to be recognized, as should be the case. And so that doesn't always translate into written policy. And so if we're trying to engage different rungs of policy, whether it be United Nations or a county or a state or a nation, being aware of all those different terminologies and who's using them is critical for identifying who you're talking to. And are those the people that, like, if you have objectives, you have a specific audience, and is that the audience that you're talking to? So it depends who I'm talking to, but as you see, I've been incorporating knowledge of Indigenous peoples, even though I just got a proposal with Indigenous knowledge, local knowledge. So yeah, it depends who you're talking to, I'd say, with that.
Yeah,
and your goals.
Very much appreciate you for unpacking that and elaborating more about that, because just so people know is that the why at least I make that distinction between I like not to use traditional knowledge, because it is a term that has been touted by the United Nations, introduced by the United Nations. We did not have any say in it, but we had to use it though. And going to knowledge of Indigenous peoples, again, like you said, Dr. Katie, is that there's this people like to use traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous ecological knowledge or whatever. But like, and your thoughts on this as well. As I finish this thought, there's this understanding that indigenous knowledge is with the peoples. Like it is with the peoples and not in books. Hence why rights there needs to be this rights element. Indigenous peoples is recognized by the United Nations. So any thoughts on indigenous peoples? Do you agree, disagree that indigenous peoples of indigenous knowledge is with the peoples?
I think it has to be living, or at least have some form of access. And books are a form of access. Native Hawaiians have a large repository of newspapers and wrote voraciously as soon as the printing press became available in the 1800s, early 1900s. And so we draw a lot of that, a lot of inspiration and filling in the gaps. A famous book is called Fragments of Hawaiian History. And so it's really a lot of those writings, though, that we have are they're formulas. They tell you exactly what to do, but it's also the design of how they teach. It's not just about 1, 2, 3, but about the governance, the ritual, the practice, the connectivity within the communities, not just human, but non-human and elements. So, but to communicate those things must live beyond the pages of a book and must live through practice. And that looks different in these times, and are adaptive depending on if you're urban or rural or anywhere in between.
Dr. Katie, a question that is asked a lot, and maybe you have some thoughts on it as well. Projects being led by that are non-profit organizations, conservation organizations that want indigenous peoples to lead the processes, lead these projects. Anything that you want them to think about, like in terms of respecting indigenous people's rights, indigenous knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm working on a few projects like that right now. And what really is being requested by communities is compensation for expertise, time, and professionalism, just as they're being approached by these agencies and nonprofits. And so for the burden to not be on Indigenous communities wholly to carry these projects from beginning to end, because those resources are limited and the same ones are always tapped out. So there's fatigue and there's burnout a lot of times. And so we're trying to create this narrative of, if you want someone to do something from Indigenous community for that intent, then you should look at them as a contractor. And I know that's sometimes a taboo thing to talk about, is the exchange of money. But we're really talking about experience that has been accumulated over a long period of time, sometimes multi-generations, and practice. And so those things are regenerative if we provide and reflect the value that we say that they have.
Oh, quick sidestep. It has a little bit to do with indigenous knowledge, but I think trying to be as valuable as possible to the people that are watching. Especially, we had a lot of youth watching and children as well. For example, just now we had an amazing kid, a 12-year-old from Marshall Islands. Anything that, in terms of personal experience, pursuing paths that you would like to or dreams of yourself or families, and trying to fulfill that. Like, does that make any sense? Like like achieving goals. I think that's what it is.
Like how to achieve goals?
Yeah, because you had in things that what I want to talk about, or like I'm alluding to, is your personal experience. is that like your postdoctoral and you're a doctor now, but it has not come like been thrown into your lap,
Oh
obviously.
yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, as it is something that is very relevant to Indigenous youth, particularly right now?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest takeaway is in Hawaii we say like follow your na'au, or follow your gut feeling, your intuition, and I really believe that's how I got here. I just followed this path that felt good. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always kind, but I believed in, and I had an intention of what I was holding through that time, which essentially broke down to healing my mother, who passed away 10 years ago during my first year in my doctoral practice or training. So you can imagine that's devastating. And so finding myself again. But in order to achieve that, it's not just you get into school and you get out. There's all these little what do you call it? Rites of passage, I'll go with calling them. Just as at home, there's different rites of passage when you grow up.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you focus on those rites of passage one at a time, instead of looking at the whole thing, then it becomes more attainable and you can focus your energy on what you really want to do. And if it doesn't work out, then you can pivot. I found out a lot of things that I didn't like doing throughout this journey. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am now. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
fortunate to work with Native Hawaiian communities and trying or having them lead nonprofits and agencies in a team and have the agencies respond to them as they would a normal contractor. So I'm growing the expectations of these agencies and nonprofits to come with a budget, come with recommendations, provide a step-by-step of how this project's going to get done and who's going to monitor it. Because though the community is the overseer, um, there's a sensibility of living there, especially in drought conditions. But then there's also the recognition of people having professional backgrounds and experiences and utilizing them to benefit the local community. So step by step, and volunteer is probably the biggest thing that has helped me out. And doing things because I want to, and people recognizing that and asking me to do things like come on here and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
No,
So
appreciate you. Mahalo for your time, Dr. Katie. Also, I just want to put it out right now. I'm doing also a longer form podcast, like 60 minutes, because we can talk more about this. Because I know that there's a lot more about like drought knowledge, Indigenous peoples, Native Hawaiians, mindset, and everything else that you talk about. Obviously, we only have 10 minutes. I already been a little bit into overtime. So appreciate you for your time.
for
Aloha
having
to
me.
everyone, Ohana and everyone else. Appreciate you
And aloha.
for being coming on the show.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.